Part 3 continues. The dust from the confrontation with the racist police officer was still settling when Langley, the undercover Amish FBI agent, was finally able to catch his breath. His hands were still cuffed behind his back, but now, surrounded by a group of FBI agents, he was the one in control. Officer Travis Wilkins, the man who had tried to arrest Langley without cause, stood helplessly as agents moved in to detain him. His arrogance had evaporated, replaced by confusion and fear as the officers handcuffed him and read him his rights. "I'm not a criminal," Wilkins shouted, his voice shaky. "This is a mistake. You're making a huge mistake." Langley didn't say anything in response. He had been playing the part of a quiet Amish man for months, blending in, gathering information, waiting for the right moment. But now, as Wilkins was led away, Langley's role had shifted from a man in hiding to a key player in taking down a corrupt system. The agents who had been undercover with Langley came over to check on him, their faces filled with a mixture of relief and admiration. "Agent Langley, you did good," said Special Agent Rachel Moore, her voice calm but warm. "But this isn't over yet." Langley nodded, though his body was starting to feel the toll of everything he had endured. The weeks of pretending to be Amish, the hours spent in tense undercover work, and now this, everything had led to this moment. But as much as they had achieved in capturing Wilkins, Langley knew that the battle was just beginning. There were bigger players in this game, far more dangerous than a single racist officer. "Let's get you checked out," Moore said, noticing Langley wincing as he tried to stand. "We can't risk you passing out from exhaustion." "Not now." "I'm fine," Langley muttered, though his voice betrayed the pain he felt in his body. The gunshot wound from earlier in the chase still throbbed in his side. Moore gave him a skeptical look. "I know you're fine now, but we need you at full strength for what comes next." "Wilkins is just a small piece of the puzzle, Langley." Langley nodded again, but his mind was already racing ahead. Wilkins was only one part of a much larger conspiracy. The investigation into Project Phoenix, the network of corrupt officials, mercenaries, and criminals, had only just begun. As the agents worked to transport Wilkins to the holding cell, Langley turned to Moore, his expression serious. "I need to get the rest of the information. The files are our best chance at understanding just how deep this goes." "We'll go through the files," Moore replied, her face hardening. "But we don't have the complete picture yet. We need to track down the big players. Whoever was behind Wilkins, behind Project Phoenix." Langley took a deep breath. "They won't stop with just Wilkins. If we're not careful, we'll end up on their list next." As the group moved toward their vehicles, Langley couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The quiet suburban town where the arrest had taken place felt far too peaceful. It was as if the calm before the storm. The closer they got to the truth, the more dangerous their every move became. They couldn't afford to waste any time. The conspiracy was vast, and whoever was at the top of Project Phoenix wouldn't rest until Langley and the rest of the team were eliminated. Langley glanced at the agents around him. Some of them were focused, already reviewing their next steps. But Langley's mind was already 5 steps ahead. They needed to infiltrate the network of those behind Project Phoenix. And to do that, they needed the information now. He turned to Moore. "Get the rest of the team on this. We need to move fast. If they know we're closing in, they'll try to clean up their mess. We can't let that happen." Moore nodded, her determination clear. "I'll get started right away. You rest up, Langley. You've earned it." Langley gave her a weary smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. There was no rest for him. Not yet. Not until this was over. As the agents drove off, Langley remained behind for a moment, staring at the empty street where everything had started. It was hard to believe that a simple arrest had led to this. But he knew this was just the beginning. He had to be ready. The game had just begun, and the stakes were higher than ever. Langley sat at the small, dimly lit desk in the makeshift operations room, the files spread before him. His side still throbbed from the gunshot wound, and though he had been patched up, the pain was persistent, reminding him of the close call they had just survived. But there was no time for rest. The files they had retrieved from Wilkins' hidden stash were their only lead. "How's it looking?" Moore asked, her voice breaking through the silence. Langley didn't look up at first. He was scanning through the documents, trying to make sense of the web of connections. A lot of this is encrypted, but there's a pattern. It's not just about Wilkins. There's something much bigger here. Moore stepped closer, her gaze lingering on the files. "Is there anything that points to Project Phoenix?" Langley tapped a photo with his pen. It was grainy, but unmistakable. "Yes. These photos are key. The people in these shots, they're all tied to something much deeper than the local corruption Wilkins was part of." Moore leaned over the desk, squinting at the photo. "That man, I've seen him before. He's linked to the senator from District 5. But how is he connected to all this?" Langley exhaled slowly. "That's what we need to figure out. He's not just a politician. He's a player in a much larger game, and I'm betting that Project Phoenix is at the center of it all." Suddenly, Langley's phone buzzed, breaking the tension. He quickly picked it up, his eyes scanning the incoming message. "It's from HQ," Langley muttered. "They've found something." He read aloud. "We've located a safe house. It's linked to the suspect in the photograph. Coordinates attached. Be careful. This is bigger than we thought." Moore nodded. "That's our next move. But we need backup." Langley paused. "No. We go in alone. We don't know who we're dealing with, and I don't trust anyone else to cover our backs right now." Moore raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. "All right, but we need to move fast. They'll be expecting us." Langley stood, grabbing his jacket and pulling it on. "We'll be in and out. We can't afford to waste any time." They both knew the risk. There was no telling how deep Project Phoenix ran, and as they moved closer to uncovering the truth, the stakes grew higher. They headed to their car, the air thick with the weight of their mission. As Langley started the engine, Moore glanced at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if they're already there? What if we're walking into a trap?" Langley didn't answer right away. He focused on the road ahead, his mind racing through every possible scenario. They had to be prepared for anything. "If we're walking into a trap," Langley said finally, his voice steady, "then we'll fight our way out." The car sped down the dark streets, and as Langley turned the corner, he could feel the tension building. The closer they got to the safe house, the more nervous he became. He'd been in tight situations before, but this time felt different. Something told him that this time, the danger was personal. They arrived at the safe house a few minutes later. It was an unassuming building, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood. Langley parked the car, and they both exited quickly, weapons drawn. Moore motioned for Langley to follow her as they moved toward the entrance. They stayed in the shadows, moving as quietly as possible. Every step they took, every turn felt like a countdown. They were about to walk straight into the lion's den. As Langley reached for the door, his phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. "Langley," he answered, his voice sharp. "Agent Langley." The voice on the other end said, smooth and familiar. "You've been asking the right questions, but it's too late. You've crossed a line, and there's no going back now. Langley froze, his heart rate spiking. Who is this? The voice chuckled darkly. You'll find out soon enough. But just so you know, we've been watching you. And now, we're about to make sure you never get close to Project Phoenix again. Before Langley could respond, the line went dead. Moore turned to him, her face pale. Who was that? Langley didn't have to say it. The chill running down his spine told her everything she needed to know. They're on to us, Langley muttered. We have to move. Now. They rushed inside the safe house, but the moment they entered, they were met with an eerie silence. The air was thick with the smell of burning paper, and the room was dark, except for the faint glow of a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. The place looked abandoned, but something felt off. Langley stepped forward cautiously, his gun raised. This is too quiet, Moore whispered, her hand on her weapon. They're waiting for us. Langley nodded. Stay sharp. They continued through the safe house, checking each room. Nothing. It wasn't until they reached the basement that they found what they were looking for. In the center of the basement, a table was covered with documents, more photographs, more maps, and a series of files marked Project Phoenix. Langley felt a surge of relief. This is it. We've found it. But as he reached for the files, the door to the basement slammed shut behind them. Langley's heart raced as he spun around. The door was locked. They were trapped. And then, from the shadows, the voice spoke again. I told you, Langley. You're not getting out of here. Langley's eyes narrowed as the voice echoed through the dark basement, chilling his spine. He and Moore were standing in the center of the room, surrounded by crucial evidence, but the sense of danger was palpable. The door behind them was locked, the only exit now sealed off. The dim light flickered, casting long, unsettling shadows on the walls, as if the darkness itself was closing in around them. Who's there? Langley demanded, his voice steady despite the rush of adrenaline coursing through his veins. A low laugh filled the basement, eerie and mocking. The voice seemed to come from every direction at once, but Langley couldn't pinpoint where it was coming from. I've been waiting for you, Agent Langley, the voice said, its tone cold and calculated. I must admit, I'm impressed that you've made it this far. But you've made a fatal mistake. You're too curious. And curiosity, in our line of work, kills. Langley's grip on his gun tightened, but he didn't move. Moore was already scanning the room, her eyes darting back and forth, looking for any sign of movement. You're not getting away with this, Langley said, trying to stay calm. We have the evidence. We know about Project Phoenix. Whoever you are, we will stop you. The voice chuckled again, more sinister this time. You think you can stop something that's been in the works for decades? That's adorable. Suddenly, the air shifted. Langley felt the weight of the room change. Something was off. He could feel the pressure building, as if a hidden trap was being set, and they were walking straight into it. Langley motioned for Moore to stay close. Get ready, he whispered. Something's not right. Before Moore could respond, the lights flickered and then went out entirely, plunging them into total darkness. A low mechanical hum reverberated through the floorboards. Langley's breath caught in his throat. He knew exactly what was happening. They were being locked in. A system designed to trap them. Moore, we need to move, Langley hissed, reaching for his flashlight and flicking it on. But as the light cut through the blackness, he saw something that stopped him in his tracks. The walls, every single inch of them, were lined with monitors, each one showing different feeds. They were being watched. Who the hell are you? Langley shouted, his eyes darting across the screens. "What is this?" From the shadows, a figure stepped forward. A man, dressed in a black tactical suit, his face obscured by a mask. The man walked slowly, deliberately, his boots echoing off the floor. "You're in my world now, Langley," the masked man said, his voice chillingly calm. "And you won't be leaving until I'm done with you." Langley's heart raced, and he quickly scanned the room for an exit. There was no way out. They were trapped, and the walls seemed to be closing in. Moore stepped forward, her gun aimed at the man. "What do you want with us?" The man raised his hand, signaling to the monitors. "I'm not here for you, Agent Moore. I'm here for Langley. You're just in the way." Langley's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" The masked man stepped closer, his eyes glinting through the slits in his mask. "You think you're uncovering something? You think Project Phoenix is the end of it all? You're a small piece in a much larger game." Suddenly, the hum in the room grew louder. Langley realized it wasn't just the lights going out. It was the sound of a countdown. A timer. "What's happening?" Langley demanded, his voice now tinged with panic. The man's lips curled into a twisted smile. "You'll find out soon enough. But for now, I suggest you make peace with your fate." Langley's mind raced as the timer continued to count down, each second feeling like an eternity. They needed to escape and fast. "We don't have time for this," Moore said, her voice steady. "Langley, get ready." The masked man let out a slow, mocking laugh. "You think you can fight your way out of this? You're surrounded. The countdown is just the beginning." Langley's eyes darted to the walls, once more. The monitors showed live footage of them, trapped in the basement, and in the corner of the room, he saw a massive steel door slowly starting to close. "Move!" Langley shouted, grabbing Moore's arm and pulling her toward the back of the room. But before they could take more than a few steps, a loud bang echoed through the room. The door slammed shut with a deafening crash. "Too late," the masked man said, his voice filled with cold satisfaction. Langley's heart skipped a beat. They were locked in. The countdown had begun, and there was no way out. The timer showed only a few seconds left. "Langley," Moore said, her voice a mix of fear and determination. "We have to get out of here. Now." Langley turned, his eyes searching for any way to break the walls apart, to force the door open. But it was clear, if they didn't act fast, they wouldn't make it out alive. And as the timer ticked down, Langley's mind raced. Whoever this masked man was, he wasn't just a part of Project Phoenix. He was the architect, the mastermind, and Langley was about to pay the price for getting too close. But just as the timer hit 0, an explosion rocked the building, and everything went black. The explosion threw Langley and Moore backward, sending them crashing to the ground. The world around them was a blur of light and noise, the floor beneath them trembling with the impact. For a few seconds, Langley couldn't hear anything, only the ringing in his ears and the sharp smell of smoke in the air. When the world finally started to come back into focus, Langley realized he was lying on the cold concrete floor, his face inches from the debris of the explosion. His head was spinning, and there was a deep, throbbing pain in his chest. His side, where the bullet wound had been, felt even worse than before. "Langley," Moore's voice called out to him, faint and distant. "Are you okay?" Langley groaned, pushing himself up to his hands and knees. The explosion had knocked the air out of him, and for a moment, he wasn't sure if he was going to be able to stand. But he forced himself to his feet, gritting his teeth against the pain. "I'm fine," he said, his voice hoarse. "But we need to get out of here. We're running out of time." Moore was already on her feet, brushing the dust from her jacket. "We don't know how many are left out there. We've got to move before they come back to finish the job." Langley nodded, but as he glanced around the room, he realized something even more urgent. The files, the documents, everything they had worked so hard to retrieve, it was all gone. "They took everything," Langley said, his voice cold. "All the evidence is gone." Moore's face tightened with frustration. "They're cleaning up their mess. And we're running out of options. We don't have much time before the whole operation goes into lockdown." Langley's mind raced. The masked man, the mastermind behind Project Phoenix, had planned for everything. They had been too late to stop him, and now they were left with nothing but questions and more danger. "We need to find another lead," Langley said, his voice resolute. "We can't let them get away with this. We need to expose them, no matter what it takes." Just as Langley finished speaking, they heard the sound of boots echoing down the hallway. Several armed men appeared in the doorway, their guns raised. "Too late," one of the mercenaries said, his voice gruff. "You should have stayed out of this, Langley." Langley's heart raced. They were cornered again. No backup. No escape. The walls were closing in. But he wasn't going to give up. He couldn't. "Move," Langley shouted, grabbing Moore by the arm. "We fight our way out." They rushed toward the door, but before they could make it, the mercenaries opened fire. Bullets whizzed past them, ricocheting off the walls as Langley and Moore dove for cover. Langley's mind was spinning. They were surrounded, and they had nowhere to run. The only choice was to fight. "Stay low," Langley hissed, peeking around the corner. He fired off a shot, hitting one of the mercenaries in the shoulder. "We need to get to the exit now." Moore fired back, taking down another mercenary, but they were still outnumbered. The mercenaries kept advancing, pushing them further into the basement. "We're not going to make it through this," Moore said, her voice tinged with desperation. "We need backup. We can't take them all on ourselves." Langley gritted his teeth. "We don't have a choice. We fight or die trying." He knew Moore was right. The odds were stacked against them. But Langley wasn't about to let this go. He had come too far, and he wasn't going to let Project Phoenix win. As the mercenaries moved closer, Langley looked around for anything they could use to their advantage. His eyes landed on a pile of old crates near the back of the room. "Over there," Langley shouted, pointing toward the crates. "We'll use that as cover. Move." They rushed toward the crates, firing as they went. Langley could feel his heart pounding in his chest, the adrenaline coursing through him. He had been in situations like this before, but never quite like this. This wasn't just a fight for survival. This was a fight for justice, for the truth. They reached the crates and ducked behind them, taking cover as the mercenaries closed in. Langley's mind raced. He had to find a way out. He had to keep going. Moore looked at him, her expression fierce. "We need to take them down, Langley. Now." Langley nodded, his grip tightening on his gun. "On 3, he said, his voice steady. 1, 2, 3. They both popped up from behind the crates, firing at the mercenaries. The sound of gunfire was deafening, but Langley stayed focused. He aimed carefully, picking off mercenaries one by one. The room was chaotic, filled with the sound of bullets and shouts. But Langley and Moore were working as a team. Every shot they fired brought them closer to victory. Finally, the last of the mercenaries fell, their bodies crumpling to the ground. Langley exhaled sharply, his chest heaving with exhaustion. "We're not out of the woods yet," Moore said, her voice calm but wary. "But we've bought ourselves some time." Langley wiped the sweat from his forehead, his mind racing. They had survived the ambush, but they still didn't have the answers they needed. "We need to move fast," Langley said, his voice hard. "We're not done yet. Whoever's behind this, they won't stop. And neither will we." As they made their way out of the building, Langley couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. They had taken down a few mercenaries, but Project Phoenix was a massive operation. And if they didn't stop it soon, it would consume everything. And Langley had a feeling that the worst was yet to come. Langley's heart was still racing as he and Moore made their way through the darkened streets, the distant sound of sirens echoing in the night. They had just fought their way out of an ambush, but the adrenaline wasn't enough to dull the weight of the situation. They had survived the immediate danger, but they still didn't have the answers they needed. And Langley knew that the people behind Project Phoenix weren't done with them yet. "We need to lay low for a while," Moore said, her voice low and cautious. "They're going to be looking for us. They know we have the files. They won't stop until they get them back." Langley nodded, his mind already working through their next steps. "I know, but we can't afford to hide. The longer we wait, the more time they have to cover their tracks. We need to move fast." Moore shot him a look, her eyes hard. "I'm not saying we should hide, but we have to be smart. We can't take them all on at once. We need a plan." Langley rubbed his temple, trying to focus through the haze of exhaustion. "You're right. We need to find out who's behind all of this. Wilkins was just the tip of the iceberg. We're dealing with something much bigger." As they reached their car, Langley noticed something strange. The parking lot was empty, the shadows stretching far longer than they should. It felt too quiet, too still. Langley's instincts kicked in, and he signaled for Moore to stop. "What is it?" Moore asked, her hand instinctively reaching for her weapon. Langley's eyes darted around, scanning the area. "Something's off," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're being watched." Moore didn't need to be told twice. She slipped into the driver's seat while Langley took the passenger side. They sped off, trying to shake the feeling that someone was tailing them. As they made their way through the city, Langley's thoughts raced. They had to be careful. Whoever was behind Project Phoenix had eyes everywhere. They couldn't afford another ambush. "We need to get to a safe house," Langley said, his voice tense. "But we can't go back to the agency. They'll be expecting us there." Moore nodded. "I know a place. It's out of the way, off the grid." They made their way to a secluded location on the outskirts of town, an old cabin that had been used for undercover operations in the past. Langley wasn't sure who else knew about the place, but it was their best option right now. As Moore parked the car, Langley couldn't shake the feeling that they were still being watched. He scanned the surroundings, his senses heightened. Every shadow, every rustling leaf, felt like a threat. They entered the cabin cautiously, checking every corner for signs of surveillance. Langley set the files down on a table, spreading them out in front of him. "We need to decrypt these," Langley said, his eyes scanning the documents. "We need to know who's at the top of Project Phoenix. Once we have that, we can take them down." Moore was already working on her laptop, pulling up encrypted files from the safe house's secure network. "I'll get started on this. It's going to take time, but we don't have a choice." Langley sat back, his mind still racing. His thoughts kept drifting back to the masked man who had been in the safe house with them. Who was he? And how was he involved with Project Phoenix? Langley's head throbbed from the intensity of the investigation, but he couldn't let up. He had come too far to stop now. He had to find out the truth, no matter the cost. Langley, Moore's voice broke through his thoughts. I've got something. Langley's heart skipped a beat as he turned toward her. What is it? Moore clicked a few more keys, then turned the screen toward him. This is big. The man in the photo you showed me earlier? He's connected to something called the Concord Initiative. And the files indicate he's been funneling money through various government contracts. We're talking about a deep level of corruption. Langley's eyes widened as he leaned in to examine the documents. Concord Initiative? What is that? Moore's face grew serious. It's another black ops operation, bigger than Project Phoenix. And it's been going on for years. This guy, whoever he is, he's been using Project Phoenix as a cover for an even larger operation. Langley's stomach churned. We've been digging at the wrong thing. We've been chasing Project Phoenix, but Concord is the real threat. And whoever's behind it. Langley's phone suddenly buzzed, cutting him off. He reached for it, his heart pounding. The caller ID was blocked, but he didn't hesitate to answer. Langley, the voice on the other end said, smooth and cold. You've uncovered a lot, but you're too late. Project Phoenix, Concord, it's all part of the same plan. And now, we're coming for you. Langley's blood ran cold as the line went dead. Moore's face went pale. They know we're onto them. Langley stared at the phone, his mind racing. We've been played. They've known our every move. Moore grabbed her weapon and checked the window. We're not safe here. We need to move. But before Langley could respond, a loud bang came from the door. Someone was trying to break in, and they were out of time. The loud bang from the door reverberated through the cabin, and Langley's heart raced. Moore's eyes widened as she grabbed her weapon, taking position by the window. The atmosphere was thick with tension, as if every breath they took might be their last. They weren't alone. They've found us, Moore whispered, her hand trembling slightly as she aimed her gun at the door. We're not safe here. Langley didn't waste any time. He had been expecting this. They had been too close to the truth, and now the people behind Project Phoenix and the Concord Initiative were coming for them. We need to get out now, Langley said, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He turned to the files, quickly scanning through them one last time. The information they had uncovered was invaluable, but it was also their greatest danger. If the enemy got their hands on it, everything would be lost. Moore nodded, but she didn't lower her weapon. The back exit's clear, she said. I'll cover you. We move fast and we don't look back. Langley didn't hesitate. He grabbed the files and slipped them into a folder, tucking it under his arm. The weight of it was like carrying the truth itself. If they made it out, they could expose everything. But if they didn't, it would all be for nothing. Let's go, Langley said, moving toward the back door. They moved quietly, but the floorboards creaked beneath their feet. The seconds seemed to stretch into eternity as they crept toward the exit. But just as Langley reached for the door handle, the sound of footsteps outside grew louder. Someone was coming up the stairs. Langley, Moore hissed. We don't have time. Langley's mind raced. They couldn't go out the back. It was too obvious. The front door would be just as dangerous. They were cornered. But as the door creaked open, Langley spotted something out of the corner of his eye. A trapdoor. Without a word, Langley motioned toward it. Moore nodded, and they both dropped down into the cellar beneath the cabin. The darkness enveloped them as they descended into the cold, musty space. The air was thick with dust, and the sound of the door closing above them was the last thing they heard before the world went silent. They crouched low, listening for any sounds from above. Langley's pulse was racing, but he remained focused. He could hear the distant footsteps of their pursuers, but they were no longer on their trail. For now, they were safe. Moore breathed a sigh of relief. That was too close. Langley didn't respond. His thoughts were already racing ahead, analyzing their next move. They had to keep moving. They couldn't afford to stay here for long. But the questions were piling up faster than he could answer them. Who was behind the attack? Who was watching them? And why were they willing to go to such lengths to keep the truth hidden? "We need to get to a secure location," Langley said, breaking the silence. "We need to find out who's at the top of all of this." Moore nodded. "We can't go to the authorities. Whoever is behind this has connections everywhere." "Then we go off the grid," Langley said. "We need to contact someone we can trust. But first, we need to figure out who we're dealing with. We're getting close, but there's something bigger we're missing." Langley stood, moving cautiously to the edge of the cellar. He peered through the small window, watching the moonlight illuminate the yard outside. There was no sign of their pursuers, but that didn't mean they were safe. Langley's instincts told him to keep moving, to stay one step ahead. "We move out in 20 minutes, Langley said, turning back to Moore. "We'll head to the city. There's a safe house there that can help us." Moore didn't argue. "I'll be ready." They gathered their things quickly, Langley stuffing the files into a hidden compartment in his jacket. The truth was in their hands, but they couldn't afford to stop. The people behind Project Phoenix were watching their every move. It wouldn't be long before they found the safe house. As Langley and Moore made their way through the back door, Langley felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. They had made it this far, but the deeper they went, the more dangerous it became. The walls were closing in, and the odds were stacked against them. "We need to be prepared," Langley said quietly, pulling Moore into the shadows as they moved down the hill. "Whoever is behind this won't stop until we're dead." "I know," Moore replied, her voice tight with determination. "But we won't let them win." Langley gave her a small, grim smile. He wasn't ready to give up, not yet. But the road ahead was going to be treacherous. Every step, every decision, would determine whether they made it out alive. As they reached the edge of the woods, Langley felt a shift in the air. The world seemed to hold its breath. He looked at Moore, who nodded without saying a word. They were about to step into a new phase of their investigation, one that would lead them deeper into the heart of the conspiracy. And as they disappeared into the trees, Langley knew one thing for sure. They had no idea what they were truly up against. But they were going to find out. Langley and Moore moved through the woods, their feet light and swift on the cool earth. The night was thick with the sounds of nature, but every crack of a twig underfoot made Langley's heart race. They were still being hunted, and the forest, though seemingly safe, felt like an open trap. Langley couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He glanced over his shoulder, but the shadows only deepened. It was hard to see anything beyond the flickering light of their flashlights. "Where are we headed?" Moore whispered, breaking the silence as they walked. "There's a contact in the city, someone who can help us track down the people behind Project Phoenix," Langley replied, his voice low but firm. "We can't stay in the woods much longer. They'll be looking for us by now." Moore nodded, glancing around them warily. "Do you think this contact can be trusted?" Langley hesitated. "I hope so. We don't have a choice." The sense of urgency hung in the air as they moved deeper into the forest, the city now a few miles ahead. But as they approached the clearing, Langley's instincts screamed that something was wrong. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. Langley froze, his body tense, every muscle poised for action. "Who's there?" he called, his hand instinctively reaching for his gun. A figure stepped forward into the dim light, hands raised in a gesture of peace. It was a man mid-30s, dressed in dark clothes, with sharp features and an air of authority. Langley didn't lower his weapon, not for a second. "I'm here to help," the man said, his voice calm but edged with urgency. "Langley, right?" Langley's eyes narrowed, his gun still trained on the stranger. "How do you know my name?" The man didn't flinch. "I know a lot about you. And about the conspiracy you've stumbled into. You're digging in the wrong places, and it's going to get you killed." Moore stepped forward, her gun still at her side, but her eyes scanning the man warily. "Who are you?" "I'm someone who's been trying to stop Project Phoenix long before you ever heard about it," the man said, his voice steady. "I'm your best chance at survival." Langley didn't lower his gun, but he studied the man closely. There was something about him that seemed familiar, but at the same time, Langley couldn't place him. "You've been tracking this all along?" Langley asked, his voice still skeptical. The man nodded. "I have. I've been on the inside, watching it all unfold. But they know I'm a threat now. I've been compromised." Langley felt the weight of his words. If this man had been involved with Project Phoenix in some way, they needed to trust him, but at the same time, Langley couldn't shake the feeling that they were being led into another trap. "I'm not here to betray you," the man continued, sensing Langley's hesitation. "But if you want to stop this, you need to follow my lead. We don't have time to waste." Langley glanced at Moore, who gave a small nod. They didn't have a choice. The man might be their only lead. "All right," Langley said, his voice low. "You've got 5 minutes. Tell me what you know." The man smiled faintly, as though he'd expected the response. He stepped closer, lowering his hands slowly as he spoke. "Project Phoenix isn't just some black ops program. It's a network of power players, people who control industries, the government, and the military. They've been operating in the shadows for decades, pulling the strings, making sure the world stays exactly as they want it." Langley listened intently, his mind racing as the man's words sunk in. "They've infiltrated every level of society," the man continued. "Every branch of government. Law enforcement, military, you name it. And the worst part is that they've been preparing for something big. A shift in power, a new world order." Moore frowned, her voice sharp. "A new world order? What the hell does that mean?" The man's face grew serious. "It means they're planning something catastrophic. They want to reset the system, create chaos, and in the aftermath, rebuild it under their control." Langley's stomach dropped as he processed the information. "And you've been trying to stop them?" "I've been gathering evidence, infiltrating their ranks. But they're too well protected. Every time I get close, I'm pushed further back. And now, they know I'm coming for them." He paused, his eyes flicking between Langley and Moore. "Which is why I'm here. I know how to take them down, but I can't do it alone." Langley's mind raced. Everything he had uncovered, everything he thought he knew, had just shifted. The conspiracy was bigger than he had ever imagined. They weren't just trying to bring down one corrupt cop or one rogue operation. This was a global power play, and Langley was now in the heart of it. "What's the plan?" Langley asked, his voice steady despite the growing chaos in his mind. The man stepped closer, his face now hard with determination. "We need to expose them all. Get the evidence into the right hands. The government, the press, anyone who can stop them. If we don't, they'll carry on unnoticed, untouchable. And that'll be the end of it." Langley nodded. How do we do it? The man's smile returned, but it wasn't friendly. It was a smirk, full of bitter knowledge. First, we survive. Then we strike. Just as the words left his mouth, a distant sound interrupted them. A car engine, revving in the distance, growing louder. Langley's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just one car, it was a convoy. "We've got company," Moore said, her voice grim. "Get ready," Langley replied, gripping his gun tightly. This is just the beginning. As the convoy of black SUVs turned into the clearing, Langley and Moore prepared for the worst. They were trapped again, but they were no longer running. Now it was time to fight back. The sound of the convoy's engines grew louder as the black SUVs pulled into the clearing. Langley could feel his pulse racing as the distant headlights illuminated the trees, their cold light creeping toward him and Moore. "We've got no time," Langley muttered, his grip tightening on his weapon. Moore glanced at him, her face hard with resolve. "We'll have to fight our way out." Langley shook his head. "We're not running this time. This ends now." They had already been outmatched, caught in ambush after ambush, but Langley was done retreating. The time for hiding was over. The man standing in front of them, the one claiming to be their ally, had just thrown them into a new game, a much bigger one, and now it was time to face it head-on. The convoy slowed as the SUV stopped, the engines cutting off. Several men, dressed in tactical gear, stepped out of the vehicles, their movement sharp and calculated. "Looks like we're not alone," Langley said, watching them closely. Moore narrowed her eyes. "We're going to need more than just us to take them down." Langley turned to the man who had appeared out of the shadows. His face was still hidden by the mask, but Langley could see the grim determination in his eyes. "How much time do we have before they find us?" Langley asked. "Not much," the man replied. "We need to take them down before they close in. It's now or never." Langley nodded, then motioned for Moore to take cover behind a nearby tree. The forest was dense, but they could still use the trees for concealment. "Get ready," Langley said, his voice low. "On my mark." The convoy's men began to spread out, their weapons raised as they started to search the clearing. Langley could hear the crunch of leaves under their boots, the soft rustle of their movements in the dark. He didn't have much time before they were spotted. "Now," Langley whispered, signaling for Moore to take her shot. In the blink of an eye, Moore fired, the shot ringing out through the trees. One of the mercenaries fell, his body crumpling to the ground, a dark pool of blood spreading beneath him. The sound of gunfire erupted in the clearing as the rest of the mercenaries scrambled for cover. Langley fired back, his aim precise as he took down another mercenary. The masked man beside them also opened fire, his shots relentless, taking down enemies one after another. "We need to move," Langley shouted, ducking behind a tree as bullets flew past them. "Don't give them a chance to regroup." They moved quickly, each step carefully calculated as they darted through the trees, taking down mercenaries whenever they had a clear shot. But the mercenaries were relentless. For everyone they took down, 2 more appeared from the shadows. "This isn't enough," Moore said, her voice tight with frustration. "We need backup, and we need it now." Langley gritted his teeth, firing off another shot. "We'll get it, but we need to take out the leaders first. We need to cripple them." The masked man appeared at Langley's side, his gun aimed and steady. "They're headed for the ridge. If we can cut them off, we might have a chance." Langley nodded. "Let's move." They pushed forward, staying low as they advanced through the dense woods. The mercenaries were slowly closing in, But Langley knew they couldn't let them get to the ridge. If they reached the high ground, they'd have the advantage. As they neared the ridge, Langley could see the flashlights of the remaining mercenaries. They were digging in, preparing to make their final stand. The air was thick with tension. This was their last chance to take them down. Langley gestured for more and the masked man to stay low and flank the mercenaries from the sides. They moved like shadows, silent and swift. Langley took a deep breath, steadying his weapon, before he moved in.
Now!
Langley shouted, his voice a command. Gunfire erupted again, louder and more chaotic than before. The mercenaries were caught off guard as Langley and his team swept in from both sides, picking them off one by one. The masked man was in his element, moving with precision, while Moore provided cover fire, keeping the enemy from regrouping. Langley took the lead, making his way to the top of the ridge where the remaining mercenaries had taken cover. He could see them now, their faces filled with desperation as they scrambled for a way out. But it was too late. Langley raised his weapon, aiming at the leader of the mercenaries. The man was trying to reach for a radio, likely calling for reinforcements, but Langley had no intention of giving him that chance. "End of the line," Langley muttered, pulling the trigger. The leader of the mercenaries fell, his body crumpling to the ground in a heap. With their leader down, the rest of the mercenaries hesitated, looking for an escape route. "Hold your position," Langley barked. "Don't let them get away." But it was too late. The remaining mercenaries, seeing their leader fall, dropped their weapons and raised their hands in surrender. The battle was over. Langley let out a slow breath, lowering his gun. The forest was eerily quiet now, the sound of gunfire replaced by the rustling of the wind through the trees. "Is it over?" Moore asked, her voice filled with exhaustion. Langley looked around at the mercenaries they had just taken down, then at the masked man who had been their unexpected ally. "For now," Langley said. "But we're not done yet. They'll be back, and we'll need to be ready." The masked man nodded, his expression unreadable. This was just a small part of the operation. Project Phoenix is bigger than any of us realize. And we're not the only ones hunting them. Langley glanced at Moore. "Then let's make sure they know we're coming." As they began to move away from the clearing, Langley couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still ahead. Project Phoenix was far from over, and they had just begun to scratch the surface of a conspiracy that reached deeper than they could imagine. The final confrontation loomed ahead as Langley, Moore, and their mysterious ally prepared to face the full extent of Project Phoenix. The conspiracy they had uncovered was far deeper and more dangerous than they could have imagined. It was a global operation, a network of power players controlling industries, governments, and military operations from the shadows. Langley knew that in order to stop it, they would need to go to the heart of the operation, expose the masterminds behind it, and dismantle their plans for a new world order. The trio moved in silence, their path lit only by the pale moonlight filtering through the trees. Every step they took felt heavier, as if the weight of the world was bearing down on them. They had uncovered enough to know that they weren't just fighting against criminals. They were fighting against a deeply entrenched system that had been carefully built over decades. The stakes were higher than ever. Langley's mind raced as he thought about everything that had led them here. The arrest of Wilkins, the racist police officer who had been more than just a local threat, the discovery of Project Phoenix, and the far-reaching corruption tied to it, the mercenaries who had ambushed them time and again, trying to stop their investigation. Each step had brought them closer to the truth, but also placed them in greater danger. They had barely survived the ambush in the cabin, where they had been trapped by a countdown timer set to eliminate them once and for all. But they had fought back, using their skills and quick thinking to outmaneuver the enemy. In the forest clearing, the fight had escalated further. With the masked man's help, they took down a group of mercenaries, but the enemy was relentless. They had to keep moving, staying ahead of their pursuers, who were growing more desperate and ruthless by the day. Now, standing at the precipice of what would be their final assault on Project Phoenix, Langley could feel the weight of everything he had worked for, the lives of those he had put at risk, the truth that he was about to uncover, and the responsibility of bringing it to light. Moore stood beside him, her face set in grim determination. "We don't have much time. They're going to know we're coming." Langley nodded. "We move fast. We hit them where it hurts." They made their way to an old, abandoned facility on the outskirts of the city, an old factory that had once been used for military operations. It was here that the heart of Project Phoenix was said to be located. The building was surrounded by high fences, guards posted at every entrance. They were walking straight into the lion's den, but Langley knew this was their only chance. The night air was thick with tension as they crept closer, the sounds of the city distant but ever-present. Langley could feel his heartbeat in his chest as they neared the gates. They had no backup this time, no more allies to rely on. It was just them against the full might of a global conspiracy. "On my mark," Langley whispered, taking a deep breath. "We go in fast and hit them hard." They moved like shadows, slipping past the guards, avoiding detection as they reached the main building. They knew the risks, but there was no turning back now. Langley had already made the decision. Project Phoenix had to be stopped, no matter the cost. They entered the facility, moving through dark hallways, the faint hum of machinery in the background. Every step felt like it could be their last, but they kept going, deeper into the heart of the operation. Inside the control room, they found what they had been searching for: the master files that contained everything about Project Phoenix, its leaders, its plans, and its vast network of influence. Langley's fingers flew across the keyboard as he accessed the encrypted files, each revelation darker than the last. Names of high-ranking officials, military leaders, and influential businessmen who had been secretly pulling the strings for years. Moore moved quickly, gathering the files. "We have everything we need," she said. "Now, let's get out of here." But just as they were about to leave, the doors to the control room burst open. A dozen armed mercenaries flooded into the room, their guns raised. Langley's heart skipped a beat. "Hands in the air," one of them shouted. Langley and Moore exchanged a quick glance, knowing there was no way out. They had to fight. The battle was brutal, a flurry of gunfire and chaos. Langley and Moore fought with everything they had, taking down mercenaries one by one. But they were outnumbered, and the room was closing in on them. The masked man, who had been with them from the start, was nowhere to be found. Had he betrayed them? Langley didn't have time to think about that. He and Moore fought their way toward the exit, but just as they neared the door, another figure appeared, someone who had been behind it all. The leader of Project Phoenix. "I knew you'd make it this far," the man said, his voice smooth and calculating. "But this is where it ends, Langley." Langley's breath caught in his throat as he recognized the man. It was the figure from the photograph, the one who had been pulling the strings from the shadows all along. "You won't win," Langley said, his voice cold with resolve. The leader smirked. "I already have." But Langley wasn't done. With a final, desperate move, he lunged at the man, tackling him to the ground. The fight was fierce, but Langley managed to get the upper hand, knocking the man unconscious. The battle for Project Phoenix was finally over. With the leader taken down, the remaining mercenaries surrendered. Langley and Moore made their way out of the facility, the weight of their success heavy on their shoulders. As they drove away, Langley looked out the window, the city lights blurring in the distance. The fight was over, but the damage had already been done. Project Phoenix had been exposed, but its influence would linger for years to come. "Is it over?" Moore asked, her voice quiet. Langley sighed. "It's over for now. But we've only just scratched the surface. The world is going to change. And we'll be ready for whatever comes next."